Hello there, and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I am your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and on a previous episode, we talked about melatonin, a stress or anti-stress hormone produced in humans, but also in plants, and said that it was actually isolated from coffee. And people thought that it was a contamination or an artifact and wasn't really in the coffee, but then they found that it was actually produced by plants and was very important as an antioxidant and for controlling the diurnal response to photoperiod, day length, and things like that. But what about the other things in coffee? The obvious things, caffeine. And what about the effect of caffeine on plants? Well, if you've grown houseplants in an office, you'll know that people often try and put their cold, unwanted coffee and tea, if you're here in the UK, onto plants as a way of getting rid of it so they don't have to go back to the kitchen or wash up and things like that. And the houseplants invariably, after a long time, they start to die off. Now, why is that? Could it be the caffeine? Caffeine is obviously the major stimulant in coffee and tea, and one of the major components. And obviously, people have studied its effect on plants. They've put on applications of it, and at low doses can actually have a biostimulant-like effect. With higher doses, inhibitory or outright phytotoxic, producing stunted growth and the classic necrosis, like the blackening of the tissues. That's how most plants die when you put tea and coffee on them. In rooting and tissue contexts, milligrams per litre range of caffeine have been reported to promote rooting, but anything above that is harmful. So maybe one cup of tea or coffee might be useful, but anything repeated is going to cause damage to photosynthesis, oxidative stress, and things like that. A small amount could even induce defense priming or disease resistance, enhance pathogen resistance. But obviously, this is not day-to-day applications. You could potentially apply it as a foliar spray. So throw your cold tea or coffee at the leaves, but most people produce a root drench effectively. So root drenches, you could have germination suppression as well if you've got any seedlings. Thought it could be actually a type of allelopathy where plants inhibit the growth of other plants. We've talked about allelopathy in the past, about how some plants inhibit the growth of other plants around them, black walnut being a classic example. But caffeine has been implicated in allelopathic responses in the past as well. And it could affect the microbes and the fungi in connection with your plants, your lovely mycorrhiza. It can have antimicrobial effects and change the microbial and fungal patterns and communities. Obviously, these will be species-specific effects. Or if you've got things like fungus gnats, they could have an effect on pest and disease. So it could kill or deter the pests. And obviously, the one that's been mostly studied is slugs and snails, where coffee grounds have been put down around plants to deter slugs and snails. People get the used grounds from local coffee shops and put them around their plants. But the problem is that you could potentially harm your plants at the same time. So what else? What else could be in the tea and coffee that could have an effect on caffeine? Well, on your plants. They're not the only active compound in the coffee and tea. In tea, there's a lot of polyphenols or tannins, and they can inhibit root enzyme and nutrient uptake. They can bind micronutrients and stop them being absorbed or even increase their levels. So that's an issue. Same for organic acids. Organic acids can do the same, and they have the other added disadvantages that they can lower the pH, which increases root stress and affects nutrient uptake as well, and can precipitate out nutrients so they can't be absorbed by plants. There's a lot of sugar in your tea and coffee. It could stimulate microbial growth, or at the same time, it could have an osmotic stress. It could pull water out of the plants, or certainly make it harder for plants to absorb water from the growing medium. So that contribution. And if it's very hot, then the heat could damage the roots. The change in temperature could damage the roots, even if it's not direct damage from heat. So that's something to consider. And then obviously the water will feed the plants. And that's why people think that it's useful for plants to have a dose of tea or coffee, because they think they're watering the plants, when really the benefits outweigh the benefits are not as high as the disadvantages. And the caffeine will accumulate, whereas the water will evaporate. And so you get this continual caffeine accumulation, and it'll take a long time to break down. Also, the other issue is that most houseplants are overwatered. And so if you are watering a houseplant with half a cup of coffee every day in the winter, that's probably too much irrigation for your houseplants. Certainly in an office environment, if multiple people are watering the same houseplant with tea and coffee, then it's probably going to die from overwatering before it gets toxic effects of caffeine. A warm office where, people are complaining it's too hot, they're too cold, so they put the heaters on, electric heaters, radiators and things like that. If there's not enough light, then that certainly can kill houseplants. Okay, so that's the effect of caffeine and caffeinated drinks on plants. A bit of an interesting one there, not directly related to commercial production of hydroponic crops, but not everything on this podcast is. Sometimes it's stuff that's interesting to amateurs and beginners and keen horticulturalists. Okay, hope you found that interesting. If you did, please leave an Apple Podcast review because it helps share this podcast and the topic of hydroponics with the wider horticultural community. Make sure you click follow so you don't ever miss an episode. And while you're listening to Hydroponics Daily, check out utrema.co.uk on your phone, and you'll find completely unique fertilizers, biostimulants, and biopesticides that you won't find in anyone else's portfolio, and do amazing things and solve really important problems for growing crops. Thank you very much for listening. Until tomorrow, goodbye.